Perfect. Okay, good. Well, we'll officially begin then. My name is Eric Molfinger, as you can see from my name thing there. I am currently the president of the Altadena Historical Society, and welcome to the first online version of our quarterly presentations. We are grateful to our wonderful Altadena Public Library, especially Chloe Cavalier Desclavel, excuse me, who is working at the library and organized all the technical stuff for this to get going here. In case you haven't seen the video yet, that's fine. The promo code and access instructions are valid until tomorrow. So if you haven't watched the film, you have one more day to do so for free without paying the fee. Of course, you can see it anytime you want on Vimeo if you pay the $10, but for free, it's still available tomorrow. Before we get started too, we'd ask that everyone except Pablo turn our cameras off and mute themselves during the presentation. Pablo will say a few words. Once we get to the Q&A portion, which will be most of the time, I think with as many people as we have here, if you scroll down to the bottom of your frame, you'll see a chat option there. And I think the simplest thing to do would be if you have questions, to submit a chat question, and then I would read the questions to Pablo, and that way I could keep things in order. It would be awfully hard to do this with 27 or 35 different people up there. So we'll try that and see how it goes. Again, this is our first time doing this, so it's a little bit of a trial by, or learning by doing here. So appreciate your patience. And let's see, one more thing then. Our presenter, of course, is Pablo Miralles. He's a 1982 graduate of John Muir High School. He has over 30 years experience as a visual communications, in the visual communications field. He's been a writer, director, and producer. He's won awards for his work throughout his career, and most recently for the video that we'll be discussing tonight. It won the Indie Fest Humanitarian Award, and Pablo still lives in Altadena. So I'll turn it over to Pablo and go from there.
Great.
We all work.
Hello? Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone, virtually. Yeah, back in Altadena, actually. I just moved back this year. So this is nice to be back. Do you want a formal introduction or just what would you like? I'm sorry, we didn't really go over what we were going to do.
Yeah, that's so you can actually, yeah, let's throw it out there. Can you just summarize the video a little bit and then ask for questions? Just a short introduction.
Sure. Well, the short I thought you already did that, but yeah, I went to film school, got my master's at UCLA, gotcha. And have worked in almost every audiovisual medium. I started Arroyo Seco Films in 2008 to make stories that I felt weren't being produced, mainly in the documentary field. This is Can We All Get Along is my second feature. It's a short feature at 50 minutes, but it's considered a feature for television purposes. And my first one was called Gringos at the Gate, which was a look at the US-Mexico soccer rivalry and its social and economic and political implications. And this film started as a completely different project. The origins of this project were that I reconnected with an old high school friend of mine, Cameron Turner, who many of you saw in the film. He was the central figure. While they were putting together his class of 81's 30th reunion, we started talking about what our experiences were in the Pasadena Unified School District during desegregation, and he made the comment that he felt that we had been lucky. Now, I would have described my education in Pasadena, Altadena, in a lot of ways, but I never would have thought of using the term lucky. So I pressed him on it, and it led to probably 3 to 4 hours of recorded interviews where I came around to understand what he was talking about. I put together a very short 10-minute film interviewing 10 members of his class, the class of '81, that we screened at his 30th reunion. And it was the reaction to that film that led me to think that there was a bigger project there. And so I began a project that I was calling Can We All Get Along? Stories of Integration from John Muir High School. And it was a much more positive, upbeat look at primarily just the years between 1970 and 1985. And I finished that film. And but when I was finished, I realized that I had missed the heart of the project. And the heart of the project wasn't that we were lucky, it's that things had changed so radically. And by the time I went to my 30th reunion the following year, I recognized that there was a much bigger story, not about the integration era, but about the fact that we have resegregated our public education. And that led to this film, because I felt it was even more tragic for Muir because it had never been segregated. Unlike a lot of public schools that had gone through integration in the late 60s through the mid 80s, that had gone through a period of segregation, had been desegregated, and are now resegregated. Muir had never been segregated. So and then there were, as I began to do more interviews, I found richer and richer stories around that. And that led to this film. Okay. I think that's good. And
That's good. Thank you. All right. And if anyone has any questions, then feel free to submit them by using your chat utility down at the bottom of the screen. I just wanted to ask you a couple things. One thing that came to mind, I know you released the film about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago.
About a year, a little over a year ago,
yeah.
April 2019.
Right. And I know you screened one session at John Muir High School, is that right?
Yeah, the premiere.
Yeah, premiere, right, that's right. The reception of the film generally from the community has been what?
Beyond expectation.
Yes.
We filled the Muir Auditorium, which was over 800 seats. We had to turn people away at the door. Yeah, I was blown away. I have to say, every time it's screened in the Pasadena area, it's been a full house. So, and 95% positive, which for independent filmmaker is amazing.
Right, right. That is good. You went to, what was your school progression through Pasadena? I know you went to high school at Muir. Did you go to Elliott or Washington?
No, I grew up on the west side of Altadena, West Calaveras, near Casitas. So my first school was Franklin. I got to go to my local elementary school.
Right.
Back in those days, it was K through third for lower elementary. Then you went to upper elementary, and then I got bused the big drive out to Field Elementary. Wow. Which people who have made comments about how negative busing is always say, oh, there's such long, terrible bus rides. Those are some of the happiest moments of my in life, where being on a bus for 40 minutes back and forth. By the time we got off the bus, I knew everything that was going on with my friends. We had cribbed off each other's homework. We had flirted. We had done, told every updated joke from what was been on, the TV the night before. Yeah. And I felt I was completely socialized. Yeah. Then after Field, I went to McKinley. Okay. I was bused to McKinley. Back then it was only 7th and 8th grade for what we called junior high. Right. And I was the last graduating class of McKinley Junior High in 78. And then I got to go to my local high school, which was Muir. So I just walked down Casitas every day. That's a nice close walk then. That's good. Okay, I'm getting some questions on our chat line here from Dave. He's curious about
what were, you said 95% of the responses were positive. Just curious about what kind of responses were the 5% negatives?
Well, I could pretty much, the majority of negative comments were people who are hyper supportive of Prop 13.
Okay, I
And,
got you.
and I get that. You know, one of the difficulties of you doing a documentary where you have to find an antagonist in order to increase the drama, and the only viable antagonist was attitudes about public education and how we were willing to underfund it as a community.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really easy because I was in school at the time. I saw the changes that happened in the schools from 1978 to 1982. Were my years
Right.
in school. We went from having full photo labs to having no photo labs. We had a diving team, and then we had no diving team. Then we had the ability to go on field trips, and then we didn't have ability to go on field trips. So while I recognize that Prop 13 was trying to fix a problem in that people on fixed incomes were being priced out of their homes because of high real estate, I guess, taxes, that was not, it wasn't well thought out. Because the people that were really behind it, Howard Jarvis, the story behind him, and I actually, you know, developed this story quite a bit, but then decided it was everything in the film had to come back to me directly. That was important to me, so that otherwise you end up on too many tangents.
Yeah.
But for those who don't know, Howard Jarvis got his start in politics by being part of a radical right-wing anti-busing group in the San Fernando Valley called Bus Stop. And when they lost in court in the early 70s, although they kept stalling it out, LA Unified didn't ever have to fully integrate or desegregate like PUSD. He was part of a group that came up with a strategy to stop these kind of social movements. And that was, if the government doesn't have the money to do these things, then they won't happen. This is, you know, if you know they call themselves libertarians, but in reality what they are is they're social reactionaries. Nordquist is famous for saying he wants government so small that you can drown it in a bathtub. And the whole point of that is by starving it of resources. If there's no taxes, then they can't do social progressive thand the Prop 13 was really was a lot about stopping integration, but it was never said. That wasn't the way they were going to strategize it. It was about keeping old people in their homes. And I really think that a different way of coming up with tax breaks for people on fixed incomes would have probably solved that problem without crashing our public institutions. Interestingly, because of their stronger unions and their better public relations, firemen and policemen were not hit as hard as education and social services after Prop 13. And that says a lot about what they were really trying to do.
Very good. All right. Thank you. From Machiko, she asked the question, is this film being shown at you may not be able to answer all this, but is it being shown at PUSD schools? Is this history being taught in PUSD? She says she sent this film to a friend who is a 2000s, the aught era year grad, and he's a local history buff.
Mm-hmm.
No idea about any of this history. And I taught in PUSD until 2017. I would be pretty certain most of my kids also didn't know this, but do you know of any ways that this is being shown in PUSD schools now?
Yeah, we're Professor Lawton, Dr. Lawton, Principal Lawton,
yeah,
Gray,
yeah.
I call him Lawton, so it's like I can't remember. He's got a lot of formal titles. We started showing it to incoming freshmen last year as part of their orientation, and it was wonderful to do. And then for fun, we even tried it with the touring 8th graders.
Wow.
although that wasn't done on a as large a group as with the incoming freshmen. And we were really excited at the responses that the kids had to recognizing that the school they were going into had such a rich history, and also such a within Pasadena, a unique culture. And then Manuel Rustin, who is a Millikan Award-winning history teacher at Muir for the Arts and Entertainment Academy, has been using it as in a part of his civil rights sessions. And he did something similar that we did, that the kids got a link and then they watched it a day before. And then I helped Manuel put together an online, this was right after the schools were closed at the end of last year. And he said it was one of the best, I guess, lessons that he had done last year. And he's going to keep it going every year. Although hopefully I'll be able to come in and actually see the the students next time. I was really excited. He sent me the responses to the questions, and these kids are, they were for not having any idea of the history, were very clued into what some of the larger issues were. Right. I even found that with some colleges that I screened it at, that they're just not aware of the history of segregated public schools, and the not so much that the things have changed, but that nothing really changed.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, from Michelle, she's asking, can you share some more about the evolution of the focus of the film and how you came from being almost absent in it to making it a much more personal story?
Well, that's if you saw the film, then you know Cameron Turner. And Cameron Turner was, he not just a great person, but he was a great teacher. He taught me a lot. And my original concept was, especially on the original version, was to have him be the voice of the film. He was going to narrate it and be on camera. Unfortunately, in 2016, as I was finishing the editing, and I was actually living overseas at the time, he passed away quite suddenly. And I was left kind of adrift, not really sure how I was going to bring all these new concepts together. In the meantime, a new movement within education was beginning, and it was a group fronted by a woman called Courtney Michton, who started a group called Integrated Schools, and it was out of LA. Lived pretty close to me where I was living in Echo Park at that time. And her thing was that white and privileged parents were the reason that schools were resegregating, that they were given the choices. And if you want to listen, you understand what that is, just listen to any speech by Betsy DeVos. You have choices, make your choices. Don't ever think about the consequences of your choices. And so she really made me internalize what it was I was trying to say in the film about it having changed. And as it so happened, I had a young child who was going to be in public schools, but I have these choices like everybody else. Yeah. What am I going to do with my choices? And I decided, after speaking with her, that I was going to choose to integrate schools as an individual, as a parent. And at first I was not wanting to join any organizations or have any sponsorships, because it was a very personal film and I was constantly evolving, and I didn't want to be a message for anything but myself. This was my film, my perspective. Maybe Cameron's perspective would be heavier. But once I figured that this would be myself making a choice to go, my son going to Muir, then it all just came together. And then it just made so much more sense. I think it became a much more powerful film and much more personal. But I had no intention of being in it or being the voice of it. Yeah, when I started it, or even 2/3 into the process.
Yeah, no, that personal approach. I mean, that really does tie it into all of us, because we've all been through decisions about where to put our kids in school. I mean, that whatever city we live in, it's always been that way. So that, yeah, that made it very relatable for a lot of us. Okay, from Warren and Isabel Skidmore, I think that they ask a kind of a general question, I think. How open is the public to improving supported public schools? And this, again, we can tie it to Pasadena here, based on, you know, what you've come across in your travels here. Improving public schools to create a population that is more open-minded and tolerant. Do you think that willingness varies across the country from what you know, or across the state and county? That's a big question, but take what you want on that one.
Well, I think since once the film was over and I started to seeing the effects of people who were in the same quandary, like they were deciding on what to do with their own children, I suddenly realized that it was a tool and I shouldn't ignore the potential. And one of the people that saw it right away was, of all people, Mayor Tornick, who came to the original premiere at Mirror, and he came up to me after, and he said, you know, we need to do a community screening of this film. Everybody needs to see this film, not just the community. That kind of, I've never met him. I didn't know anything about him. And I was focused on getting it out to film festivals across the United States and a little bit internationally. I wasn't really thinking about what kind of impact it could have locally. But that got me thinking. So we eventually set up a screening at the Lemley Theater in November.
Okay. Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
And we were I was really excited because by then I'd become pretty close with Courtney and the founder of Integrated Schools, and she was very excited at the final cut, and she'd only seen an early cut, and really felt that I was. And we were talking about doing a rollout to there's 12 or 15 chapters of integrated schools across the United States. And this is going to lead to your idea of what it's like in other countries or other communities. Yeah. Unfortunately, she passed away. I think there's like bad luck involved with it. Michelle, be careful. So she passed away just before New Year's, and so we were on. And then, of course, with COVID, it wasn't going to happen anyway. The tour, but so then I took the big step to actually become a founding member of the Pasadena chapter of Integrated Schools. And if anybody's interested, just go integratedschools.org all together. Okay. To see if your beliefs align. We're really looking to bring parents together. So if you know parents who are, fighting the perceptions of what public education are in Pasadena, because that's the big thing that we have to overcome. The Pasadena schools, for all of its funding issues and all of its perceived bureaucratic problems, actually have some world-class programs at the schools. And what Integrated Schools tells to everybody across the United States, but I think it's really important within Pasadena, is that before you plunk down that $30,000 to $40,000 to go to a private school, visit your local school, see what they have, take a tour, talk to the principal, talk to teachers, talk to other parents, and try to look past the fact that the children in the school in Pasadena are primarily children of color, if you're white, and that just because they don't share your skin color doesn't mean they're not committed educators teaching or committed to learning as students. Any teacher that you talk to in PUSC will say it's not that they wouldn't get good educations if you're not there. It's not like having white children in the school is suddenly going to make it better just through osmosis. It's because the powers that be and the participation of the entire community gives the public schools a greater chance of success, that it increases the opportunities. If more parents of privilege and more parents who have already themselves been through PUSD in times when things were better, commit to participating in what is a foundational part of our democracy, public education, the great equalizer, the thing that gives everybody opportunity, then everybody will have a better you know, everyone's out to try to like get for themselves and make choices for their children's possibilities. But unless you recognize that there are foster children and children who are homeless who don't have those same opportunities, and you're taking away from them when you choose to go to a private school or outside of the district. I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. I'm not, I mean, it's one of those things where it's just important for me that people recognize that there are consequences, and those consequences are, you know, I wrote something for Pasadena Now recently where I said, you know, there was a time when here in Altadena, there was a really good chance that the people you met were going to end up going to school with you and you would get to know them. And now I go down the streets and I see all the graduation signs and they're all from different schools.
Exactly. We've been noticing that too. Yeah, it's striking, really striking.
Starter. Where are these kids not, where are they spending their time together? When are they learning that they're all part of this community? When Altadena Historical Society 30 years from now puts together their big exhibits about life during the 2000s, and they're not going to be able to show photographs of school kids together that represent the actual community. Right. They're not going to have people that aren't spending the time in those common spaces, the parks, the libraries together, because they're all out doing their special programs. Right. And I find that kind of sad, because I do know that people in my generation are very proud of the community we grew up in. And anyway, and I feel that's getting lost. And I think that's, you know, and school is definitely the place where it all starts. Yeah, well, I have a good friend of mine up the street here. I taught with him for many years and taught his sons, and he went to Muir probably about the same time you did. And he just said, you know, what was it like then? And he said, that's just where everybody went. Everyone went to their public school. It was, you know, that was just how it went. And that's not the case anymore. You see, the yard signs have been really striking with the COVID, putting everybody, you know, no one could graduate publicly. So they all graduated sort of on their own by posting the yard signs, and you can see where everybody went. And it's strange that I've seen a lot of other public schools. I've seen Arcadia High School in Altadena. I've seen Covina High School. I've seen San Marino High School. It's like, wow, why is that? Anyway, I digress. A lot more questions coming up, Pablo. Here from Janet. She did not grow up here, but graduated from high school in '81. She's dating herself like this. That's risky. Anyway, I think my age group were more idealistic. Did you encounter other works about busing integration in making this film? And I think you've answered that a little bit already with the integratedschools.org. That seems like a pretty interesting group. Are there any other works regarding integration and busing, especially in Pasadena, that you encountered in making this film? Works, there's books. There's also a wonderful project that Michelle Zach did with the district, where she goes over the history of the district through racial, the movements with, you know, the changing demographics and how it was adjusted to busing. And, but there are no films or videos that deal with it. No, in fact, there's very little. That's why I actually had to go to like CBS News to find archival footage. Yeah, okay. Is Michelle Zach's work, is that part of her history of Altadena, or is it a separate work that she did for the district? Why don't you unmute her so she can tell? Yeah, let me see if I can figure out how to do that. All right. Let's see. Michelle, can you hear us?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Can you see me?
I don't think I can unmute, but I don't think I can start.
That's all right. Yeah. Can you give us information about the work you did? Integration
in Altadena, between Wilderness and City, which was a book published by the Altadena Historical Society, I think there's a narrative of what happened that hasn't really been collected anywhere else, that takes all of the sort of the perfect storm that happened between the civil rights movement, redevelopment in Pasadena, in which in that decade when 20% of all the housing stock was torn down, most of it in areas where there were minorities. And then the busing and Prop 13, how it all came together. And, you know, we had the first lawsuit outside of the Deep South about integration, and
Yeah.
in which 3 parents from the 3 different high schools sued PUSD. And they had put together such a strong case that the feds took it up. And that's how the case ended up all the way in the Supreme Court, and how we got it was called forced busing by the by the Jarvis group, but really how we got integrated schools, and it lasted for about 10 or 12 years. So that story it's both in the Altadena book and also another book I wrote, Southern California Story.
Okay.
And then one other thing, there's this book, I can't show it, but I'm Advocates for Change, which is an oral history interviews on the desegregation of the Pasadena Unified School District. If I was trying to hold it up, but the video won't let me do it.
Oh, there you are. Try it now.
Here. Let's see. Where's
your camera?
Where's the camera? Oh, here. Here's.
Okay.
And this,
I don't have to find mine.
yeah, here I found it. I found it.
I have it. I was just going to look for it.
Okay.
And there's another book called It Happened in Pasadena. So mainly it's the written record. Pablo really gave us an incredible gift with his film.
Yeah.
And as someone who watched it evolve over 8 years or something, and it kept getting better and more powerful. And
yeah, Michelle, I may check with you after we're done tonight. I may try to gather that title and information about those books and distribute it to people that have been with us tonight, so they can get a look at it. I know your history of Altadena is not in print right now, but it's still available probably on
yeah, you can get it on Amazon.
yeah, it's probably pricey, but we have copies at the Altadena Historical Society, and I'd be willing to lend my copy to anyone that wants it. But anyway, I can send resources to people that have been with us after the meeting. But thank you, Michelle.
Oh, thank you for this.
Okay, from William Lines to everyone, he's asking, when did busing end and why was it ended?
Well, busing phased out more than just drop dead ended. The last classes that were fully bused, like in the way that I was, were 95, 96. But already by then, they'd expanded the boundaries of the schools to a point where fewer and fewer kids needed to be bused. And the history of the zoning of the schools is a whole nother thing. I don't think more than 1 or 2 years went consecutively where they had the same zones. And it was a political battle. It was, there was a time, I don't know, this is, I know a lot about it, but I don't know how much of it is pertinent anymore. But the mid-70s was a reactionary time to busing in Pasadena education. The school board had gotten very hostile to busing. There had been a recall where some of the people featured in the film barely survived, Allo, and as one of them. And a movement started that's called the fundamental schools started, then countered by the alternative schools. And they were all this interesting back and forth of, I don't know what to say, but the period of actual, you know, you knew you were going to go across town or you were going to go to your local school and for what grades, that was from 70 to 85. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I have a comment from Walter Dominguez here, not a question, but he just wants to say, very well done documentary and a topic I'm so interested in, as I attended Muir High and graduated in 1965. It was a wonderful school then, not just because of the faculty and all the fine scholars among the student body, but because it was such a rich mix of students, rich and poor, middle class, every race and religion, except maybe at that time Muslim, but who knows? You know, it's been a while.
Lebanese, but I'm not sure they were.
All that, yeah. I did, you know, one thing I did get my kind of following in with Walter here. I've grown up in the area too. I didn't go to Muir, but I've always known Muir as the place, where Jackie Robinson went, and just your expansion of that view of Muir to all the illustrious grads. I mean, it really is a special place in Southern California, if you think about it. All the different talented people that have gone through there. It's a pretty amazing place. So anyway, I'll move on, and let's see. We have a question from Janet, and let's see. Yeah, are you aware of what private schools the majority of white kids go to, or are youth just disappearing? I know my street in Altadena has only a couple of kids. We're all older and childless residents.
Well, birth rates are down. It's expensive to live in the PUSD district. Those are all primary motivators for the shrinking school population. But, it's a big but, the percentage of school-age children that go to private schools in Pasadena is more than double the national average. But it also has to be said that historically, Pasadena residents, 1 out of every 5 school-age children attended private school. Even when Pasadena Unified was considered the premier school district in California, and California was considered the premier public schools in the country.
Yeah.
And that is a socioeconomic reality of Pasadena. It was a playground of the rich. It had more millionaires before Beverly Hills was ever built.
Yeah.
And there was an elitism. And I'm fascinated. I'm actually working on a project right now that looks at 2 Pasadena residents who grew up in the same era but had completely different lives. And that is, of course, Jackie Robinson, but just a mile away from him grew Julia Childs, who went to Westridge and had a very elite upbringing, ended up going to a boarding school up in Northern California for part of time, went to Smith College. But to me, that they could live so close together and have completely different realities is fascinating. It speaks to what is Pasadena. And I think during that period of desegregation, I think Pasadena came closest to being a more unified city. It's only gotten more, spread, segregated.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
Word to use for it, but
right. Yeah, I taught at Westridge for 12 years and then I taught in PUSD for 20. So I'm well aware of the difference. Those 2 groups never saw each other. Yeah. I think Pasadena has one of the most extreme wealth inequalities of any city in the state that I can think of. You look at the San Rafael Hills versus East Orange Grove. It's striking. Anyway. I have a question here. Let's see. From Victoria Knapp, our Altadena Town Council member. Pablo, I'm so grateful to know you and to be involved with integrated schools, largely because of you. Given the still segregated nature of many of our PUSD schools, what do you say to Pasadena, Sierra Madre, and Altadena residents who even have kids enrolled in PUSD about why they should care, particularly given that she says 45% who would attend private and charter schools. So anyway, that's her question.
Well, I think for a lot of us, these last couple of months of protests about systemic racism, focusing around the George Floyd murder, have left us wondering what we can do as individuals. Right? And it's my opinion that the period that had the least social unrest in this country and was the only time when racial achievement gaps academically began to shrink was the period of desegregation. And so I would say to people, that if you want to do more than just hang a BLM sign on your front lawn, and you have school-age children, and you want to try to change this country for the better, send them to your local public school,
Yep.
your local segregated public school specifically.
Yeah.
If you've been avoiding
Integrated.
because all your friends and family have said, no, that's a bad school, and you've never gone on that campus to find out. And if you're so focused on test scores over the fact that there's actually what is an education and what does diversity do for children.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really feel that we only have a few places in our community where we can actually create stronger, better, healthier communities, and public education, public schools is, to me, the easiest and the best.
Yeah.
I mean, I just look at some friends of mine's Facebook pages and see who their friends are if they grew up in, you know, either completely isolated communities that didn't have diversity, or grew up with parents who felt that their children needed to have segregated education.
Right.
And they're very monolithic. And I look at my Facebook page, and everybody's there, right? Every socioeconomics is there,
Yeah.
and every race and religion. And if that's just one, you know, it's just a small window, but I feel from my own experience. And it's what I hope for my child. It's why we moved back up here. I want him to feel the fertile earth of Altadena as a place of tolerance and inclusiveness.
Yeah.
The first day we got here, you know, I saw my neighbors. You know, I had a black neighbor, 75-year-old, who, you know, was knew a lot of my old classmates, and
Right.
the Asian person across the street, and with her white husband, and the Latinx couple across the street that run Altadena Altadena Nursery, and it was just like, okay, this is where I belong. This is my world. No one should look alike. No one should think alike. And hopefully, as more and more white and privileged parents begin to send their children back to public schools, because it is happening. It's a movement. It's happening very slowly because it's a wall that they have to overcome. Perception of inferiority of those other people, that they don't want to be associated with them, and they don't want their children being whatever. They have to come up with their own logic behind it. But I mean, I grew up on a street that people wouldn't go to, you know, because they were scared. And I thought it was only because my neighbors had dark skin. And that is a sad thing, because they would have met some really amazing people if they had come.
Yeah. I think you're right about people have to, a lot of white families just have to get over that fear, basically.
Right.
It's an irrational fear, but it's there. Yeah.
I hope that answered Victoria's question.
I think you did. She can she can follow up if she'd like. She did post, by the way, Victoria posted to everybody the integratedschools.org website.
That's very sweet.
Yeah, so she did that for us. Thank you, Victoria. And let's see, Tim Gregory has a question, and I'd like to almost generalize it a little bit about La Cañada. La Cañada broke off from PUSD in the early 60s, I forget exactly. And so, you know, what effect did that have on integration, first off? And I guess I'm always been curious as to, do you know anything more about that decision and how that happened? That did change things pretty radically in Pasadena for schools.
Yeah, it's a long story. It actually begins with earlier than the actual events, in that the people of La Cañada Flint Ridge wanted to secede from Glendale schools early on. That didn't work. So Pasadena schools had really positive, you know, it was a positive place, and you know, racially Muir was 90% white early on, so there wasn't that sense of, you know, there's a threshold under which white families traditionally in our systemically racist country feel comfortable, so long as minorities are serious minorities. As the debates around, they never had the population to start their own school district for years. And as they started getting closer and closer to that threshold, they started petitioning, because there was a lot of politically powerful people in La Cañada and Flint Ridge, to try to get dispensation to start a school district, even though they didn't have what the California State Board of Education felt was a population size. And as changes in the late 50s and early 60s with regards to race relations, the civil rights era started to create a lot of unease in the communities of La Cañada and Flint Ridge, and that only accelerated their desire to spin off the PUSD. And they're interested in reading the newspaper clippings of the time and seeing what was, it's as close to being outright racist as you can get. Some of the comments about why they needed to get their white daughters out of the mirror, you know. Anyway,
look that up.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. The point is, I think, though, that every time I think of this, I think of my interview with Dennis Murin. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to squeeze him into the film because we had such great conversations. He was the last class of La Cañada people that went to Muir.
Okay.
Two very important figures in Muir's history. JB, what's his real name? He's the guy who created most of the cadences for the drum corps.
Okay.
I'll think of his name. It'll come.
Okay. Yeah. Don't worry about that.
Maybe because that's one of the cadences. When they started opening the school up in La Cañada in '62, it was going to take 2 years to get everybody over. But a lot of the students that really felt invested in Muir decided not to go to La Cañada, of which those two were part of that group. And when I think of his interview, and I said, well, why didn't you go to La Cañada? And he goes, well, they were the most boring people, the people I
Yeah.
And he said, you know, here I would be at Muir, and I would walk down and I'd hear this amazing music coming from the quad, because people would bring their little transistor radios in 1963 and be playing music that he knew his parents would hate, you know. And he learned about Motown, and he went to the art classes and saw this amazing art being created from people that were from much different backgrounds than himself. I'll just put it this way. So he fought his parents and got to finish his year out at Muir in '64. And he stopped in the middle of the interview and he said, you know, there's no way I would have 9 Academy Awards if I had stayed in La Cañada.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is striking to see the juxtaposition of La Cañada High School and Muir so close to each other. Separated by Devil's Gate Dam, basically. And well, anyway, that's that. But thank you. Let's see. Michelle has posted some more information on our chat board here for people to look at. She said they did a 2-day seminar for teachers in PUSD for teaching American history and explaining the program. And that's on the wall outside of the PUSD boardroom. And let's see, some other notice. The Republican National Committee put money into the school board candidates who would oppose busing in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And Walter came back with a comment following up on what you just said. He said, we still had La Cañada kids when I graduated in '65, but after that, they no longer came. That's pretty much everybody.
There might have been a couple of other stragglers. Probably.
Yeah. And William Rogers asked about a guy, I've heard the name, but I don't know a lot about him. The name of Richard Vetterli, Vetterli. He was a professor at PCC in the 70s. And William asked, where did he fit into the debate? His name is listed on several of the court cases.
Wow. Michelle, do you remember Beverly? Was he the one on the school board that in the late 70s? I'm trying to remember. I know.
I think he was. I think he was associated with, but I'm not sure. But I'm almost.
Myers gang, was that it?
He was associated with people who were trying to redo the school board and get more people who would be against busing on it.
Yeah, I always think of Myers as the primary mover of that movement, but Beverly was definitely a name on there.
Yeah.
One of those reactionaries I talked about that came onto the school board in the mid 70s. And although, you know, thank goodness there was a court order and they couldn't really change that much, they definitely tried to make things difficult. And they used a lot of the language that is now very common in the discourse around public education, like parents need a choice and we need to have neighborhood schools, and only if it's the neighborhood school that's like us.
Just wanted to add this one thing that you touched on, that it's really important, and most people don't know it, that the RNC, from Washington, they were looking at what was going on in Pasadena, and they actually funded the campaigns of several anti-busing people. For our little school board election, the national RNC got involved trying to change it, and as you mentioned, create the fundamental schools, and that was kind of code for more segregated schools. There was Marshall was the first one, and then also the elementary school in Sierra Madre.
Yeah, Don Benito. Yeah, it's very interesting how few people from Marshall and Don Benito know the history of their own schools. Now, mind you, the schools that they are now don't really resemble much of what they were in the mid 70s when they were created. In a lot of ways, I'd like to say that they were the very first charter schools in the United States. Yes. They were allowed to have dress codes when dress codes didn't exist for the rest of the schools. They de-emphasized sports and extracurriculars. Instead, they were talking about catching up to the achievement gaps of the international students in terms of math and English, and they got rid of some of the foreign languages at one point. And I know only that my friends who lived in my neighborhood that were unfortunately sent there hated it. And we're really happy to get back to Muir when they made it back. But the point is that they sold it as a place of discipline, and that the public schools had become undisciplined. And this was mainly it was about young people trying to have a voice. It started in the 60s. In the early 60s with organizations, student organizations, and by the late 70s, there was a sense of empowerment since the Vietnam War. But this really bothered a lot of conservatives, that there would be things like the Black Student Union and METCHA, and those things were not allowed, as far as I know, in the early years at Marshall.
Yeah, no, that's right. I taught at Marshall for 20 years, so I did explain the history to the kids. This was a white flight school when it was founded, and it's not that way anymore. But
it still has a certain elitism. Yeah. There's this belief when you go to the school board and there's talk of closing schools, and if Marshall's name is mentioned, you get these parents who go up and say, if you close Marshall, I'm leaving the school district, I'm going to private. And it's like, whoa. Are you committed to public schools, or are you committed to your school that has high test scores? Yeah. And why are test scores so important? And what, and then that leads to all things about, varsity blue and people taking and tutoring, and then you start this whole world of equity and what does it all mean? And unfortunately, I think it's the last residue of that in the PUSD, because I think at least now the school board and a lot of the administrators are recognizing that every school has to be a good school. It's not about having certain elite schools.
Yeah, I do know some parents who applied to go to, I don't know how the district allots slots in schools anymore, but they wanted to go from middle school to Marshall, and they didn't get into Marshall for whatever reason. There's a waiting list. So they left schools. It was like, okay, well, that's too bad. But, that's what we got. Okay, let's see what we got here. We're almost done. A couple minutes left here. And Dave. Pablo, thank you for sharing your talent with us in the world. And then someone else, their name is Merrill Lynch iPad, so I don't know who they are, but it says, I'm from LCHS in 1970. Part of our class gift was to Head Start in Pasadena. Lois Richards came to our graduation to collect a gift. I'm not sure who she is, but maybe you do. The school administrators at La Cañada were not happy about our decision to give money to Head Start. That's
Wow.
okay, so there we are. And Daria, one of our Altadena Historical Society board members, says fantastic talk. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And Walter Dominguez adds applause, applause. So that's all we have for questions, and it just happens to be 7:59.
Perfect.
So,
Let's go have dinner.
yeah, that's right. But, Pablo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if anyone has any questions or information they'd like to get from us, please feel free to email the Altadena Historical Society, and we'll get back to you with anything we can follow up on.